everybody, this is Daniel with Propelio again, and we're here for part 2 of the basic strategies, and we're going to be talking about fixing and flipping. It's a scenario that's often glamorized on TV. Most people that got interested in real estate investing have seen TV shows like this, where somebody goes out, buys a distressed house, fixes it up, and turns around and sells it for a profit. It's a very common strategy. Many people do it, but the TV shows kind of give it a glitz and glam, a dramatization that really isn't accurately depicting the way this business works. So I'm going to go through and just give you the highlights of what this is. It may be something you've already been experienced to, but I'd suggest you go ahead and still watch it anyways. And what we're going to go through and just kind of show you some of the things you need to consider about this, how you're going to get into it, and the things that you need to have involved for moving into this particular strategy. So as we move forward with the basic series, this is to kind of open your eyes to what the different strategies are and how they're implemented. Some of these strategies are relatively basic and you may have heard of before. Some of these other ones you may not have a complete and total understanding of, such as maybe subject to or wraps. A lot of people get those misunderstood. But what we're going to do with this right here is give you an understanding of what fix and flip / rehabs are. And we're going to follow this series up with another video series called Rehabs, and that's going to take you down through step by step what they are. But with the fix and flip strategies, you're essentially trying to target sellers with distressed properties or make a relationship with wholesalers to find distressed properties for you. And what you're going to do with them is you're going to fix them up and then turn around and sell them. It's pretty simple in that concept, but there are some key things you need to think about when you purchase these and you take into consideration all of your numbers. A lot of times I see people bring to me a property and like, oh man, I've got this awesome property. I can sell it to you right now for $60,000. It only needs $25,000 in repairs and you can sell it for $100,000. Well, there's a $15,000 spread there, and that person will present this to me saying you can make $15,000. There's a big point in between there that you've missed out on, and that is your acquisition cost, depending on what your funding is. If you're paying cash, you don't have that right there, but you're also not getting the benefits of leverage, which increases your cash on cash returns. But you're also not considering carrying costs, taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, those types of things. You're not considering sales costs. Even if you have an agent in-house, you still have to pay your buyer's agent. You could try and sell it FSBO, for sale by owner, but predominantly you're going to want to sell this thing on the MLS and want to have an agent involved. So you're going to be looking at probably 6% of your sales costs going towards an agent. You may have seller's concessions. You're going to have closing fees depending on how you negotiate the sales contract. But there are sales associated with this that start eating away at that gross profit. So if somebody brings you a deal saying, oh, $60,000 purchase, $25,000 in repair, sell it for $100,000, you can make $15,000. Not the case. You need to have a substantial spread in between there. I personally account for anywhere between 12 to 15% of my resale costs being attributed to acquisitions, sales, and holding costs. That's not the case across the board, but with my financing and everything else that I have in place, if I've got a 30% gross margin, I'm looking to make anywhere between 10 to 15, maybe even as high as 18% on that, and anywhere between 10 to 15% of that going to acquisition, holding, and sales costs. So things to think about there. Overall though, depending on what your acquisition strategy is as far as your net margins and everything else like that goes, you can kind of float around where you want to be. But the general rule of thumb, industry standard, but it's saved many investors from losing a dime, is 70% of your after repaired value, that is what the home would be worth in its pristine condition, retail ready, 70% of that minus repairs is where you would typically want to be at all in on a property. Some rehabbers will adjust that up. You know what, I'm okay with being 76 cents in on a property. I say cents, percentage of after repaired value. It's terminology that you may hear getting thrown around from there to there. But I may be willing to go up to 76 cents on a property depending on what my gross profit on the backside is. So you buy it, 30, 45 days, 4 months, 3 months, depending on the size of the repair budget. Once you've got it all fixed up, you turn around and sell it, and at the sale, you make your profit. So not really a difficult strategy, but there's a lot of moving parts to think about inside of that. So looking at an example of what we just talked about, we've got a property here, and we've gone ahead and we've made a good friendship with a local wholesaler, and that wholesaler brings us a property and says, you know what, I've got a property that's available to you. I'm going to give it to you right now for $75,000. It needs $25,000 in repairs. And overall the retail on it should be about $135,000. So if I'm looking at purchasing it for $75,000, I put $25,000 into repairs into it, and I sell it for $135,000 retail, That's a $35,000 gross margin. That's where there's $35,000 gross profit. That's where my profit is. But there's things that I need to take out of that profit, such as my acquisition costs. What did I have to pay the lender to borrow it? How much did I have to pay monthly for taxes and insurance, utilities and other things like that? What did I have to pay to sell it? What did I have to pay my real estate agents? What did I have to pay the title company? Did I have to take any concessions on sale? Those are the types of things that you have to back out of those grosses when you're just doing your initial numbers. So I'm looking at $7,000 in sales costs. So we're looking at about 6% of the sales price plus 1% in potential title fees and concessions. And we're looking at another $9,000 in acquisition and holding costs. Depending on what kind of lenders you have, depending on how long you hold the property, depending on your taxes and all those other things, I'm estimating about $9,000 in there. So I'm all in on this property for $116,000. That includes my purchase, my repairs, my holding, sales and acquisition costs. All of that's for $116,000. So if I turn around and sell it for $135,000 and I subtract out my expenses into the property of $116,000, that leaves me with a $19,000 gross profit. On a property like this with a $25,000 repair budget, you should be able to easily have that accomplished in under 25 days, easily have it accomplished in under 45 days, and end up netting, let's just say $20,000 over the course of 2 months. Not really a difficult process. There's a lot of things to think about in there. There's just time management and things to think about with that. But where was I at right there? Something else you need to take into consideration there. I said 45 days to repair it and everything else. So let's say I get it from the wholesaler, I close it in a week, and now I'm a week into it. I take 45 days to remodel it. So now let's say I'm about 2 months into this, and then I put it on the market. One thing that you should always take into consideration as a remodeler, as a rehabber, fix and flipper, is what is my days on market going to be? Days on market meaning how long is it going to take for me to sell this property? Is it going to take me 5 days, 20 days, 50 days, 100 days? The longer the market says you're going to have to hold on to this property, you need to add that buffer into your numbers. So if I know I'm only going to have to hold it for 5 days, I need to take into consideration 5 days worth of holding costs from my lender. If I'm going to have to hold it for 50 days, I'm going to have to take into consideration 50 days worth of holding costs for the taxes, insurance, and my lender. I personally don't like dealing with any properties with a days on market of greater than 30, and most of my days on market I'm looking for under 14 days. That is for me in my particular submarket. Depending on what market you're in, you may have different opinions on that. I like for at least under 2 weeks on market. So a week to close it with the wholesaler, 45 days to rehab it. I'm into it for about 2 months now, and let's say I have a 2-week hold time on resale. So now I'm into it for 2.5 weeks, not 2.5 weeks, 2.5 months to get a contract on it to sell it. And then it takes, let's say, anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks to close it. So that's another month. So even with a 45-day remodel, I'm still holding on to this property from anywhere between 3.5 to 4 months. And that's if everything goes as planned. So when you're getting your loans and you're getting all that into place and you're thinking about all this in the back of your mind, put all that together and remember, you might be into this property for 3-4 months if things go right. If things go wrong, you might be in there a little bit longer. All things to think about though when you're doing due diligence. So let's take a look at some things to consider. So things to consider when you're looking at doing this strategy is you're probably going to need some reasonable capital reserves up front and or partner with somebody that does. Your credit doesn't necessarily have to be great because a lot of times you can get asset-based lending that is basically looking at the property you're buying, not so much you. But your credit does help in that process. I mean, you're not going to be able to go in there with absolutely trash credit and get that loan. I say you're not going to be able to, but it's definitely not going to be as easy. So you're going to probably need some capital reserves and some credit up front to get into this. You're putting a lot of money out there. You're doing a lot of work, and there's some risks involved with that. So unlike wholesales that we talked about in the previous video, is wholesales really have minimal risks. Your risks in a wholesale deal are practically nothing. I don't want to say nothing, but it's very minimal. But with a rehab, you've got quite a bit of money exposed here. I mean, let's just say anywhere between $100,000 to $1 million, $100,000 to $1 million you've got tied up into this property. And don't let that scare you because, I mean, a lot of times you can use leverage to borrow other people's money, hard money lenders, private lenders, institutional funds. There's different ways of getting that money available to you. So don't let that scare you, but that is put out there, and it is at risk. And you mitigate those risks through wise financial decisions, making sure that your numbers are accurate, your hold times are good, and that you've put some contingencies in there for things that you weren't paying attention to. But you are at risk to market cycles. Let's say you're in an appreciating market cycle, like when we were in 2002, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. A lot of money made themselves multiple millions of dollars doing this exact same strategy, and this is the only strategy they knew. They knew how to make money in a market that was going up. And come 2007, 2008, and then we had that financial oops. When that happened, there was a lot of people that understood how to make the money in this strategy right here, and they weren't prepared for what happened when the market went down, and they got themselves into some trouble. So when you're in this strategy, you're probably going to be exposed to the market for anywhere between 3 to 6 months. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on the amount of remodel you're doing there and your holding times on resale. But you do have risk there. I'm not saying be scared of that, be aware of that. And when you're aware of that, you structure financing that allows you multiple exit strategies. Let's say your intent was to buy it, fix it up, and sell it, but you may want to have yourself lined up for if the market turns or you're struggling to sell this property for whatever reason, you can reposition the loan into a long-term loan and turn it into a rental. So that way you're not just sitting there in a property you can't get rid of. Or possibly if you could structure financing in such a way that you could turn around and sell it on a wrap. Or owner finance it, lease option. There's several different things you might be able to consider there, but you need to have the right funding in place for this property that you can take those exit strategies and be ready for multiple different ways to get out of this in case your exposure to the market puts you in a situation you don't want to be in. Just things to think about. And if all of that kind of went over your head, don't let that scare you. We will do an entire series on this strategy alone coming up in the near future. So once again, we're going through, and I'd have to say in the past, my average deal, looking at national studies for a rehabber are looking at probably, if I'd have to go back and look at it again, so don't quote me on this, but it's like a $37,000 average gross profit for a rehabber in this industry in 2000, I think it was 15. Once again, loose numbers, but you can see there's a pretty big chunk of change there. If you can knock out, let's just say you knocked out 15 of these properties and throughout all of them you were averaging out a $37,000 gross profit, you got yourself a pretty good year there. I mean, not too many people would complain about that. You do have risks involved. You need to learn to mitigate them. And if you're interested in seeing more about this particular strategy when we release those videos, please go ahead and find us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook. Check out our content there. Check out our content on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel there so you're notified as we release more content in the future. And as always, feel free to go to Propelio.com to see it all and check out what we can do to help you as a real estate investor. Thanks.